Welcome, AP Psychology students. This lesson today is dealing with adulthood and aging. So we're going to be looking at how adults change physically, mentally, and socially, really from roughly age 18 or so, all the way through the end of life. So we're covering a lot of ground. So we'll get to it. The first question, really, you just want kind of a ballpark, just kind of big picture. It's talking about how do we physically decline as we start, middle adulthood and beyond. I mean, you could probably guess some of this just having been around older people, but the general trend is just kind of a slow, gradual decline in things like muscle strength, endurance, stamina. Um, of those, the one that hangs on the longest is physical strength. So when I think about myself, like I couldn't run a race to save my life compared to like, you know, high school students or anything. If I had to pick one thing I could probably keep up with, though, probably would be physical strength. There is like a term called old man strength. There's a little bit of like research to back that you're able to hold on to that compared to the other ones. But generally, slow, gradual decline. Sensory abilities. So everything, it's just, again, kind of a slow, gradual thing. Your vision over time, again, these are trends. Vision tends to get a little bit worse and worse. Your ability to see in dark surroundings. So if you've ever had, maybe you're reading a book or something in a room and it's kind of dark and your parents come in and turn on all the lights, like, how can you read in here? For them, they probably can't read that book in that room, but maybe you can. So just the ability to be able to read in a somewhat dark room. Hearing over time gets worse and worse. Basically, without getting too technical, the little hair cells that pick up on sound. Think of it like the carpet you have in your house, that if you put like bookshelves on it, those hair cells get pushed down and they get matted. And after they once they get hit with a lot of sound, they'll kind of keep coming back up, but over repeated exposure, they finally eventually stay down, and they get those hair cells in your ear get damaged, and they don't recover. And just our ability to hear high-pitched sounds continues to get worse and worse throughout time, and so taste, your ability to taste, isn't quite what it used to be. So you name it. It gets a little bit duller and duller over time. Health, obviously, overall is going to get worse over time. There's a little bit of a caveat to that, though. The big things like cancer, you're more likely to get, like, your immune system is less able to fight those things. But little things like colds, flus, you're actually, as you get older, a little bit better because you built up antibodies to those things. So there's a little bit of a silver lining. But the big stuff, yeah, and when you do get sick, it takes way longer to recover. And just with all this stuff here, like if you work out, it takes longer to recover than it used to. All that kind of stuff. Aging brain, cognitive changes. Some of this stuff is review. We've talked about how your brain kind of peaks probably around 20 or so. And we're not talking about like drastic drops, but around 20 is kind of where your peak fluid intelligence is. And it's going to be a slow, really imperceptible decline over time. And it's really just the speed more than anything that, if I think about as a 42-year-old right now when I make this video to, when I was 20, it's just the quickness at which I can recall information. Again, we talked about fluid intelligence decreasing, crystallized intelligence, assuming there's not some kind of cognitive impairment like dementia or something, that will continue to increase as you accumulate more knowledge. There are some brain changes, the areas of the brain involved in learning and memory, like the hippocampus, can start to shrink a little bit. The frontal lobe, which is involved in planning and decision making, which it's the last part of the brain to fully form. It can also be one of the first ones to kind of it kind of goes in reverse too. So it can start to diminish. And so, for older people, this can hurt their ability to make, plans, judgment, those kind of things. If you've ever been around really old people that start to lose their filter and maybe say things that could, be hurtful or just kind of lack social awareness, that could be dealing with a lack of frontal lobe development there. Recall versus recognition memory. Again, memory gets worse overall, but it's really recall that really gets worse. Your ability, just if I say, hey, name the 7 dwarfs, we did that earlier this year, that's harder. But if you're given a list of names and you look at the list and pull from that, that holds up fairly well for older people, but they just need more cues and more clues than younger people do. I guess the one other thing I would say is things that are like unimportant, just like remembering random stuff. Young people do way better at that. When you get older, if it's important, you'll if you concentrate and like you want to remember it, you will. But younger people do much better at just remembering random stuff, maybe like lines from a movie or something. Older people don't do that as much. This is just kind of showing you, again, differences between recall and recognition. You can check that out at your leisure. So we talked about physical and cognitive. A lot of the rest of this is social, which is interesting. I think this is on the study guide, some things to know about this idea of a social clock. So as you move into adulthood, a lot of cultures have this preferred timing of like when you should get married and when you should have kids. And this is going to differ from culture to culture. It's going to differ from historical period to historical period. Think about what the average age at which people get married and have kids now. I think marriage, it's like 26, 27 for women, 29 for men. It's a little bit later than that for kids, but 50, 60 years ago, it was like 22, 21. And so it changes over time, but it's like, what's kind of the social norm for when we do these things? So it has changed over time. I think I mentioned in some classes the idea of as you get older, you move into middle adulthood. A lot of times adults encounter what's called a sandwich generation. This is where the adult has to take care of kids, when they have kids, so maybe they're in their 30s, 40s, or 50s, or even later. So they got their own kids, but their parents are getting older, and they've got to start taking care of their adult parents. So you see your parents, and right now you're probably like, haha, your mom, mom, dad, you're old, whatever. But one day you'll go home and you'll see your parents, many years from now, and you'll say, oh my God, they're old. Like, they might need help around here. And so I experience that now. My mom is almost 70, and she lives on an acreage, and all the time she needs help fixing things, and just there's a lot of stuff she can't do. And so I'm over there several times a month just doing odds and ends stuff, and I don't mind doing it, but it's another layer of responsibility. Some interesting research on love and marriage and what the research has to say about correlations and stuff. You can kind of read these, but they found that marriage is correlated to higher levels of happiness. Again, these are general trends. Doesn't mean it's going to be true for every individual. But generally, people that are married are happier than those that are not. Having children is not correlated to happiness. So, I mean, yes, they do bring a lot of joy, but they also bring a lot of stress and responsibility. People that don't have kids, what I tend to think is people that don't have kids, maybe they don't know what they're missing, and maybe they wouldn't have wanted them. And then the people with kids, they don't know what they're missing by not having them. It's like hard to imagine how your life would have been different. So, again, that's just my guess. This is an interesting one. Having like what they call it a trial marriage or cohabitating before you're married, so like living together before marriage, is actually correlated with higher divorce rates. Kind of a counterintuitive finding. A lot of people would think, oh, if you try it out together, see if it works, that would lead to lower divorce rates. But what they think might be going on is the people that live together before being married might be less religious and thus less tied to the idea that like we have to stay together forever. And so they live together, they get married, and then if things don't work out later on, they're like, oh, well, it didn't work, and they go their separate ways. I mean, that's one idea. Having children tends to correlate with lower levels of marital satisfaction, which, I mean, again, it's a lot of responsibility. It can be a source of conflict. There's less money to go around with kids. There's all kinds of reasons, but it doesn't surprise me. And then I've mentioned this one before, but parental happiness. So if parents do have kids, their happiness increases when parents move out, when they become empty nesters. Again, it doesn't mean they don't love their kids and they won't miss them, but there is a lessening of stress, a lessening of responsibility, and they get some of their free time back, and they get to spend more time with their partner again. And so there are some things that it makes sense that it would make them happier. I'll come back to that later. Is there an age that we're happiest? The research on this is a little bit unpredictable. It's a little bit contradictory. There's some research that says no, not at all. A graph like this would kind of show that there really isn't much of a difference. But that being said, I've found some other research that shows a little bit of a U-shaped curve. So you can see kind of the relationship, age, and life satisfaction. You can see it kind of dipping in middle adulthood and then going back up in old age. I would also add here, though, if you look at the actual numbers, these are not huge changes, really. You're talking about like 7.6, 7.7. You're going down to like 7.1, 7.2. I mean, these are not massive differences. So even if there is a dip, it's not a huge dip. But I'm not sure. If there is, I could see why, just more responsibility, more stress. But it seems almost like we're working backwards from the conclusion. So I don't know that there's a definitive answer to that question. It could probably be debated, but I don't know. What I would take away from the research is it's not really definitive. There's some research that says yes, there's others that say no, and so just take that for what it's worth. Finally, just a little bit on death and dying. We can spend a little bit more time on this in class if you're interested. You can kind of read some of the stuff that really this is just kind of, maybe it sparks an interest, morbidly for some people, but maybe you've experienced some of this or seen it in other people that before people die, there's what they call a terminal decline. So often within a few weeks, few months, there's a huge drop in cognitive functioning. But what's interesting is often a few days before people pass away, there's a massive surge in energy. And I saw this with my own father like 3 or 4 days before he passed, where he had this huge surge in energy and we didn't really know better. We're like, oh my gosh, is he getting better? And then 2 days later, he was, basically unconscious and passed away a day or two later. So, but it's a very common thing. Oftentimes, people will defer death till after holidays or birthdays. And if there's something to look forward to, they will defer death. There's more deaths like 2 days after Christmas than a week before, that kind of thing. And then finally, just a little bit about grieving. Just understand, maybe some classes have told you there's like distinct stages, like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Not really. There's things that people experience, but people kind of go back and forth through all of them. And so there's really not a correct way to grieve. So I'm kind of running out of time. I got a 15-minute limit here. But if you want to talk more about this in class, bring a few questions. I'd be happy to do it. And we'll see you in class, guys. Thank you for watching.